Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 10 waiver wire targets for the 2019 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the waiver wire targets at the running back, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, and defensive positions going into Week 10. Before we begin today's video, let me remind all of you, if you haven't yet already, click that subscribe button. I want to go ahead and foremost thank all of you for helping us get to that 12,000 subscriber mark. It is absolutely incredible, and I cannot thank you guys enough for your support. Also, don't forget to click the bell notification button to stay up to date on my latest content. And if you like today's video, don't forget to click the like button. Hey everybody, how's it going? All right, so we're talking about Week 10 waiver wire targets. But before we begin there, I want to talk about a little bit of news, a couple pieces of information that have come forth thus far here on Monday, and a couple of the storylines that I kind of want to review after Week 9. I kind of want to give a review. I wrote down a couple sentences about every single game, things that we could take away from said games, and going forward perhaps could key in on as fantasy owners and etc. Okay, so starting off from the top. All right, so a couple thoughts I had. Kenyan Drake on Thursday night, what a performance, 160 all-purpose yards. That's ridiculous, especially against a team like that. My question now remains, with this David Johnson's injury, are they more likely to keep Kenyan Drake in the rotation and maybe not hurry back David Johnson? For those of you who are Kenyan Drake owners, if David Johnson comes back, you know, that entire work share pretty much disappears. So if it's an as serious injury as we may assume it to be, then Kenyan Drake has value, but perhaps maybe you want to sell high. Moving on, between the Jaguars and Texans in London. Woke up early for that game, and boy, was it a one-sided matchup. I think Minshew, after that performance, perhaps has lost his job. They're going to go into a bye week here in Week 10, and coming back, if Nick Foles is back and his injury is completely healed up, he's going to get the starting job back over Minshew after a performance like that, unfortunately. Moving on, the Bears versus the Eagles. A couple thoughts that I had. Number one, welcome back, Zach Ertz. I've had a lot of hope for Zach Ertz. I kept holding on to it and keep saying, I cannot have this guy on my bench. No matter what, I have to play him every single week, even through the woes. And he finally showed up again this week. Another piece of information news, Deshaun Jackson is going to be having surgery on his abdomen. He's probably out for the season. He tried to play yesterday. He had 1 reception, 5 yards, and he was done. Moving on to the Bears side of the football. The Bears still can't stop the run, and Mitchell Trubisky is truly getting near the end of his tenure as this starting quarterback. It's only been a couple seasons, 3 seasons, and it's the end is near, and it's not looking good. At least David Montgomery is at least finding some value on the goal line with 2 rushing touchdowns yesterday, saving some people some weeks. Moving on, the Colts versus the Pittsburgh game. Jacoby Brissett went down with an injury. That is not great for the organization, and nor is it great for all of the receiving options for this offense. But Brian Hoyer came in and threw 3 touchdown passes. Brian Hoyer, yeah, the backup running quarterback, a guy that prior to the season beginning was the backup for Tom Brady. They got him, they traded for him, they brought him in, and he looked good. Completed some passes, got one to Zack Pascal, got one to Jack Doyle, and this offense looked a lot better than we may have anticipated initially. For those of you who are in a 2QB Superflex league, Brian Hoyer might be a pickup this coming week, if in fact Jacoby Brissett is to continue to be out. Speaking of Zack Pascal, he did his job filling in for T.Y. Hilton, double-digit fantasy point wide receiver, as I expected. On the other side of the football, without James Conner, no problem. Jaylen Samuels is a PPR fiend. 13 targets, 13 receptions, unfortunately fumbled the ball, didn't get much work in the running game. Tre Edmonds, the 4th-string running back of this team, had majority of that work, no problem. As a PPR receiving back, Samuels, looks like a lot of value to be had there. Moving on to the Jets and the Dolphins game. Jamison Crowder luckily got all of his value within 1 drive. And the first drive of the game, pretty much, he scored about 13 fantasy points, and he was done. Sure, he got a couple sprinkles here and there, but he was the only person that really played up to their potential this week. I thought Le'Veon Bell, even with as good as he played, he got some work in the passing game, 16.5 points in half PPR. I expected more. I expected more from Sam Darnold. I expected more from Robbie Anderson. This is a team that is perhaps one of the worst in the NFL. Truly, I do believe they are one of the worst in the NFL, and it is proven as you lose to an 0-8 team like the Dolphins, or 0-7 team, like the Dolphins. and it's embarrassing. So obviously that's unfortunate. Maybe we just have to reevaluate and ditch some of those players because it's not looking good. Also, they should probably fire Adam Gase, but that's my opinion. Moving on, Preston Williams is a huge game, a guy that I talked about earlier this season as one of my sleepers. I mean, like before the season even started. Had his huge breakout game. 2 touchdowns, 5 receptions, 60-some odd yards, and then he has a season-ending injury and he's gone. So Devonta Parker, right? Okay. Moving on. The Chiefs versus the Vikings. It doesn't matter who plays quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs. This offense is so talented that they make the quarterback that is there even better. So imagine when Patrick Mahomes comes back, when Matt Moore is getting the work done. It's just... it's pretty glaring how good this offense, the scheme totally is without Patrick Mahomes. And the running game got going. Damian Williams, just out-targeted and outran LaShawn McCoy and had some big runs. May have won his job back potentially. Adam Thielen on the other side of the ball, unfortunately, re-aggravated his quad or hamstring injury. Unfortunately, that's not good. I don't know who's going to fill in for him. It looked like Laquon Treadwell is probably the guy, or maybe it's BC Johnson, but that wasn't great. Also, for those of you who own Dalvin Cook, you may be thinking, why didn't he have a great week? Well, Amir Abdullah came in and stole a receiving touchdown out of that backfield, which is not fun at all. I don't know why they're using 3 running backs in that backfield, but it's a little concerning. Moving on. Speaking of the fantasy MVPs, let's talk about Christian McCaffrey continuing to just be a monster. 6 points in half PPR. The guy's unstoppable. I think he had a 40-point, regular full PPR week. On top of it, Cam Newton's probably not coming back for a little while. And the way Kyle Allen has played, and the fact that Curtis Samuel stepped up, DJ Moore finally stepped up. This is looking better and better for this team. They're a playoff contender, and they're on the run and trying to make a run here. So good for them. Also, on the other side of the ball, Derrick Henry, welcome back. Obviously, we knew you were going to have a great week against that terrible run-stopping defense of the Carolina Panthers. You went ahead and you took advantage of that, and that's good on you. Moving on, let's talk about the Bills versus the Redskins. My prayers have finally been heard. I thought to myself, there's no way. I mean, it's too late now. They just keep feeding the ball to Frank Gore. This is Adam Gase of last year. They don't want to feed Devin Singletary the ball, even though he's the future running back of this organization. They refused to do it. Even last week, the week before, they never wanted to do it. And finally, it has happened. Devin Singletary, a 20 rushing attempt week, scores a rushing touchdown, has a buttload of rushing yards, gets work in the passing game. Unfortunately, dropped a passing touchdown. The dude could have been one of the top 3 running backs of the week if he caught that touchdown. Had a monster week overall. And finally, I think has established himself as the RB1 of this team. We will talk about his future schedule and how it is very, very beneficial for him, especially for him keeping his job going forward. On the other side of the ball, Adrian Peterson had over 100 yards. It continues to confirm the fact that the Buffalo Bills cannot stop the run, and it will only help Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt this coming week. Also, rest in peace to Terry McLaurin's value. With Dwayne Haskins at quarterback, it's not good, so you're hoping that Keenum potentially comes back this week. Moving on, Russell Wilson, NFL MVP, proved it with 5 touchdowns. They finally have a new tight end. We'll talk about him in a little bit. Lockett and Metcalf having monster weeks, have some of the easiest schedules at the wide receiver position rest of season. We talked about that a couple weeks back. That continues to stand true. They are performing out of their minds. When Lockett's getting 18-plus targets in a week, you know it's coming, and that's ridiculous. On the other side of the ball, Winston didn't play bad. Mike Evans is a monster, while Chris Godwin looks like a pedestrian just spectating. That's unfortunate, but Mike Evans owners, he's continuing to tear it up every single week. Moving on, Raiders versus Lions, a higher scoring event like we anticipated. Galladay monster week. Marvin Jones monster week. Matthew Stafford continuing to produce. Some of the other weapons in that offense not really moving. There's a reason why they lost. Is because the other side of the ball, the Raiders, are rolling. They're rolling with the running game. They're rolling with the passing. It doesn't matter. This team is on fire. And they're going to take on a team that just rolled the Packers this past week. Speaking of the Packers, let's move on to this next game. The Packers got rolled altogether, even with Davante Adams back. This is a team that was averaging so many points per week, and we just saw them get annihilated. Offensively, they could not move the ball. They couldn't stay on the field. On third downs, the pass rush was getting after Aaron Rodgers, which, typically doesn't happen. This is a great offensive line, but when you're sending that pressure, Bosa, Ingram on the same side of the football or on the same side of the line, it makes it so much harder for Aaron Rodgers. They got rolled. Jamal Williams still had value. Everybody else died. And then we have the Chargers running game pretty much being revitalized to an extent. The Chargers kicking game, that one was impressive for certain. But moving on. Also, Steelers kicking game, Boswell had a monster game. Moving on. Sorry to all Browns fans, all Browns fantasy owners. Freddie Kitchens needs to be fired. Him and Adam Gase are and maybe even Matt Nagy at some extent. These guys are just not coaching well at all. It's embarrassing. You come out here and you lose to Brandon Allen in his first start. Nothing to take away from Brandon Allen. He played well. He found his receivers. He let Noah Fant have a monster game. Just get him the ball in space. The guy was able to just get past everybody. Sutton played well. The running game was there. Phillip Lindsay had himself, like 10 yards per carry average. Too bad Royce Freeman disappeared this week. But that team got it going right into the bye week, so that's fun for them. And then the last game of the week, the Sunday night matchup, we had Lamar Jackson establishing his dominance in the AFC, taking on the undefeated Patriots defense, and goodness, did he just embarrass that defense altogether. They really had no answer for stopping this option run scheme, and really Lamar Jackson took over the game and never let go of the reins. And then the Patriots, again, they got smacked because they finally played a good team that is good on both sides of the football. So altogether, pretty good performances. That's the review of the week. Now let's go ahead and talk about some 2019 Week 5 running back targets, shall we? May have taken a little long, but again, I just wanted to get my thoughts out, a little bit of a review, a couple questions that we still need to have answered, but hopefully we will get those questions answered in the coming days. All right, moving on. Let's talk about my Week 10 running back targets for the 2019 season. As you can see to the left of me, we have Devin Singletary as my number one pickup. I mean, listen, Devin Singletary, I've talked about him for so many weeks. He must have already been picked up by you, right? If he hasn't already been picked up by you, then this is absolutely the week to do it. The guy finished as the number 6 running back on the week. Again, 20 carries, 4 targets and 3 receptions in the passing game. A guy that saw a lot of work, and the coming games, the next 2 games for his schedule are beautiful. Playing against Cleveland, who, as we saw last week, or yesterday, Phillip Lindsay ran all over them. They cannot stop the run. They are one of the worst. The bottom, I think they're bottom 8 in stopping the run, which is not great at all. And then they play against the Miami Dolphins. So Devin Singletary can have 2 good weeks to establish himself as the starting running back of this team for the rest of the season. And we're hoping that. We hope that a couple weeks back, we're finally seeing it go. The plans are actually getting into or set into motion finally. All right, moving on to number 2, Kenyan Drake. Like I said again earlier, if in fact David Johnson's injury is serious and they don't want to force him to come back from said injury, why not just keep Kenyan Drake in the lineup? He played absolutely fantastic. They play against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this week, and then the following week they take on the 49ers again. This guy was able to do it once against the 49ers. Sure, they're probably prepped and ready to whoop his ass next time, but I do really believe that a guy like Kenyan Drake in this offense, he looked clean. Only 3 days with the team, he came in and looked fantastic. Let's not forget, this is an Alabama running back that has the ability to be a 3-down back. Obviously wasn't given that opportunity the last couple years in Miami, finally being given the opportunity in an offense that really spreads it out and gives him room to make some plays. A guy that, again, you could sell high or you could hold on if David Johnson's going to miss some time. All right, moving on to number 3, Jaylen Samuels. I think James Conner's probably going to miss one more week. And I think Jaylen Samuels, again, a PPR fiend, a guy that you can instantly pick up and throw into your lineup. He should have already been picked up. But again, when I look at the ownership on Yahoo Fantasy, a guy like this isn't even owned that often. I think he's owned in like 60-some-odd% of leagues. Actually, no, he's higher than Singletary. He's higher than Kenyan Drake. He's higher than a lot of guys. Wow, he's higher than Damian Williams that we're going to talk about next. But actually, you know what? Maybe he's been picked up by a lot of your leagues. But again, if he hasn't been picked up and you're in a full PPR, this is a guy you probably want handcuffed with James Conner rest of the season. Moving on to number 4, Damian Williams. Again, he out-carried. He had 12 carries to LaShawn McCoy's 3. He had, I think, 2 or 3 receptions out of the backfield, while LaShawn McCoy had 0. He had a huge 91-yard run where he completely snapped the safety's ankles, took her to the house, and Tyreek Hill hawked him down because of how fast he was. Damian Williams, hopefully, has fallen back into favor because it looks like, to me, LeSean McCoy has fallen out of favor. Now, this is a little bit toxic and maybe even volatile to an extent, because if it only takes 1 week to lose your job in this offense, then it only will take 1 week for Damian Williams to also do the same. And he's done it in the past, and he could do it again. But again, this is a guy that, you're associated with one of the best offenses. They're running the ball heavily because there is no Patrick Mahomes, and they ran it against the Vikings and played well. That's impressive. All right, moving on. Obviously, he had 12 carries for 120 yards, 1 rush for 91 yards. Okay, so you take the 11 carries for 30 yards, 3 yards per carry average. That's not great. I get it, but that's all that matters. Really, when we look at it at the end of the day, the guy produced. And if he has the capabilities to continue to do so, then he'll continue to do so potentially. I mean, the coming games that he has, Tennessee and the LA Chargers, they're not completely immune to teams running all over them. We saw Christian McCaffrey take care of that this past week against Tennessee, and we've seen a lot of teams run the ball heavily. Most recently, David Montgomery, 127 rushing yards on 27 carries against that Chargers defense. Just saying. Moving on, Ronald Jones. Ronald Jones, according to Bruce Arians this morning, has been named the starting running back of this team. He says, and quote, he is the more explosive running back, and I 100% believe so. I mean, he produced it this past week, and he is said to be given more touches in line for him in the coming weeks. They've got a pretty good schedule going forward. In terms of the running back position, it's not beautiful, but I think as long as he's getting more touches and more carries, and he's getting more use in this offense, he's going to have value. Ronald Jones is my number 5 option on the week. Moving on to number 6, Derrius Guice. I'm not sure when Derrius Guice is going to come back and play. We're assuming that it's going to be against I think they were saying that he could potentially come back and play against the Jets. Now, let's see what week the Jets is. That was their speculation, because they're going to bye week here, and then in week 11 they play against the Jets. So that's when they're assuming that he can come back and play. Now, we still have Adrian Peterson, who is still running and chugging for 108 rushing yards, a total of 130 total yards on the day in week 9. So there's always a possibility of them splitting the backfield. But again, Derrius Guice still has value. Moving on, the last option here, number 7, Kareem Hunt, will be back this week off of the suspension. And according to Freddie Kitchens, he has a role in the offense. If the role consists of, hey, when we're in 3rd and 1 situations, we pull out Nick Chubb, and in 4th and 1 situations, we keep Nick Chubb on the sideline because we don't want to win games, then sure, Kareem Hunt has a role in this offense. But I don't trust this offense in general. So be very careful with running backs here. Be very careful. Be very careful. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk about the wide receiver position today. Let's talk about my wide receiver target. Starting off, again, I want to mention something. There isn't much talent left on the waiver wire, especially in 12-team leagues. When I go to my 12-team leagues, a lot of these guys, all of these guys are not available. There's no way they're available because that's just how it works. Especially if you have a lot of bench spots in your league, it's not going to be there. So I don't want to hear, Andrew, none of these guys are available, because I get it. And that's how fantasy works. If there's no one available, then you don't pick up anybody. Don't waste your waiver positioning. Always keep it solid so that if in fact something does happen, an injury, a trade, there's no more trades, an injury or a signing occurs, you can be the one to be the first one to pick up a player. Like this past week, T.Y. Hilton went out, boom, Zack Pascal, open and ready to go. Preston Williams is gone, boom, maybe Devonta Parker, only owned in 36% of Yahoo leagues, can be the guy that you can pick up and play for the rest of the season. All right, anyway, let's talk about my number 1 receiving option, number 1 target of the week, Mohamed Sanu. Incredible, right? The dude, I didn't expect, 100% didn't expect him to come out and play such a big role in this offense so quickly. Only in his 2nd week with the team, had a monster week. Now, if he's available, I'd be surprised, because a lot of you had him and you owned him as an Atlanta Falcon. As soon as he went to the Patriots, you're continuing to double down on his value. Again, they go into the bye week here in week 10, and there's a potential that maybe he's available in your league. If he is, you have to snag him up at this point. The guy had 10 receptions, just as many as Edelman, caught himself a touchdown, and was very valuable. And to be honest, on certain drives, he was the only guy catching the ball for this offense, because no one else could get open against that defense, who had a great secondary altogether yesterday. All right, moving on to number 2, Zack Pascal. Like I mentioned earlier, this is a guy you probably should have picked up last week near Friday, because As soon as we heard news of T.Y. Hilton going down if you don't have the sleeper app, go ahead and download that. That's very helpful. As soon as we heard news of Zack Pascal, T.Y. Hilton going down and potentially missing 3 to 4 weeks, we knew who the next guy up was. We knew it. He had produced all season long, and when T.Y. Hilton missed weeks, this was the guy that was the number 1 wide receiver for this team. Going forward, Zack Pascal, great option. Moving on to number 3, Jamison Crowder. He is the only Jets piece outside of Le'Veon Bell that I want to touch the rest of the season. They still have a great schedule, and Jamison Crowder continues to see a lot of targets, so he is a great option. Moving on to number 4, Sterling Shepard. Sterling Shepard's not going to play tonight against the Cowboys, on Monday Night Football. Because of the concussion, injuries, and blah, blah, blah. Yes, he is cleared concussion protocol, but he's not going to play this week. But in the coming weeks, this is a guy that is the number 1 wide receiver of this offense, and once he comes back, will have value. He's been dropped by many team owners, so maybe you can go ahead and scoop him up before he comes back off injury and has some pretty good weeks with Daniel Jones. Moving on to number 5, Devonta Parker. Like I mentioned earlier, Preston Williams is out for the season, yet Devonta Parker has been very consistent all season long at the wide receiver position, a guy that, to be honest, somehow we can, in seasons past, saying the words Devonta Parker and reliable had never been used in the same sentence. But somehow, some way, we're going to continue to say it because in the last, 5 weeks, 15 fantasy points, 10 fantasy points, 15 or 14 fantasy points, 8.9, 13.7. He's consistent. He is a consistent wide receiver too. The guy is producing every single week in this offense, catching 4 touchdowns in the last 5 games. That is ridiculous. And you can only thank Mr. Fitzpatrick for that. He has no bye weeks coming up. They've already used their bye week. In the upcoming schedule, Indianapolis, Buffalo, Cleveland, Philadelphia, Jets, Giants, Cincinnati. Oh my God. That seems like free points. Moving on. A.J. Brown as the next wide receiver I wanted to mention. Here's the thing about A.J. Brown. It's a little tough with him, right? I think between him, I'm kind of curious. Where are the Tennessee Titans on this list? Thank you very much. Let's look at the Tennessee Titans really quickly. In terms of targets, right? Corey Davis disappeared. Completely gone. In the last 2 weeks, after that huge performance, has been nothing. He really has been nothing. Yet, A.J. Brown led the team in targets this past week, had himself 4 receptions, 81 yards, and he's continuing to see a pretty good amount of value there. Obviously, they play against the Kansas City Chiefs this coming week. Kansas City, pretty much is a team that's going to put a lot of points on you. And I think if, in fact, this team is going to have points put on them, there's always a potential that they have to go ahead, use, Ryan Tannehill's arm. And maybe A.J. Brown is continuing to see more and more favor from him as the weeks progress. He's been a 9, 8, 10-point guy the last 3 weeks in half PPR. Not a bad wide receiver 3 option if you are in need, especially with the bye-apocalypse this week. All right, moving on. Laquon Treadwell. Like I mentioned earlier, Adam Thielen re-aggravated his hamstring injury. This is the guy that stepped up. Treadwell has been a guy that has been there for the last couple of years and has been pretty underwhelming. Hopefully, he can maybe step up into a role, but don't expect him to 100% be Adam Thielen. Don't expect that. Expect him to be a wide receiver 3-4, maybe less, because I'm just throwing the name out there because Thielen's probably going to miss a couple more weeks. If your hamstring injury is re-aggravated like that, then you probably want to stay off of it and stay healthy. As a team that is probably trying to make the playoffs too, they got to stay away from using a guy like Thielen too much in the coming weeks. The last option, Hunter Renfrow, in the last 2 weeks has continued to see a great amount of work in this offense. I think this Raiders offense is rolling into this coming matchup. Sure, as a slot receiver, he gets to take on Desmond King. That's not fun, but I think rest of season, Hunter Renfrow has been somehow continue to carve himself out a pretty decent role within this offense, and it's quite impressive. And I think going forward, could potentially, figure something out. In the last couple of weeks, 88 yards in a receiving touchdown. This past week, 54 yards and a receiving touchdown. Double-digit fantasy points. Not a bad option going forward. All right, let's go and talk. Let's go and talk about the tight end position going into Week 10. All right, obviously, really quickly before we continue. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they take on the Cardinals. If O.J. Howard is available, please pick him up because if, in fact, he is healthy, he needs to be picked up against the Cardinals. They cannot cover tight ends. Cameron Brate did nothing, dropped a goose egg this past week, and maybe O.J. Howard can reestablish himself there. But going into Week 10, The Rams are back off of a bye week. Maybe people drop Gerald Everett in your league. Go pick him up. Vance McDonald performed this past week like I anticipated. That's why I told you to pick him up last week. With Mason Rudolph at quarterback, typically he is a guy that he continues to look for in the offense as a security blanket outside of Jaylen Samuels. So Vance McDonald continues to have value. Number 3, Jacob Hollister, the tight end for the Seattle Seahawks, a guy that scored two receiving touchdowns of 5 of Wilson's completed passing touchdowns this Sunday against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Is this the Will Disley of this offense? Is this a guy that we could perhaps rely upon in this offense going forward? I got to go watch a little bit more film on this guy, especially from a couple weeks past, see if he's gotten any work anywhere else. But as of right now, not a bad option. If a guy like this is getting targets and he's getting receptions and he's being a reliable option, especially in the red zone, we know how much this offense loves to use the tight end position. We know how much it's been the successfulness of it with Will Disley and or Jimmy Graham years past could be a good option going forward. Just looking at his snap counts, the last couple of weeks, he's continued to increase. I mean, he didn't play anything in the first 5 weeks of the season, but as of late, 35%, 51%, 36%. And this past week, I still don't have numbers on that, but if in fact he's playing more than Luke Wilson, the dude's seeing a lot of targets. Could be some valuable option there. Noah Fant had himself a huge week. Obviously, 1 reception for 80-some-odd yard touchdown makes a big difference. But then again, it could string to something different and more production in his way if Brandon Allen wants to continue to target him. Moving on, Ryan Griffin. I'm not on the Chris Herndon train. I'm done with it. Crowder and Bell. That's the only guys I want to touch in that offense. Ryan Griffin potentially should have had a touchdown. That was a BS call. Really just kind of tilted the entire game for the Jets, but so be it. Last option, Dallas Goedert. Still sees a lot of targets and a lot of receptions with Zach Ertz having a pop-off game. If you're really desperate, not a bad option in decent matchups. Moving on to the quarterback position for Week 10, Kyler Murray takes on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers after a huge week against a stud defense. Obviously, a couple plays made outside of his hands. You throw it and the guy goes for an 80-some-odd yard touchdown, Andy Isabella. It helps Kyler Murray. But I think this coming week against Tampa Bay should be very favorable in my eyes for him. Could see a pretty good boost of fantasy influx and points. Moving on to number 2, Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones in Week 10. Who do you get to play? Let me go ahead. There's a reason why I put him on this list, and I completely forgot. There it is. He plays against the Jets, one of the worst teams in the league. New York versus New York, and I think the Giants are a much better team overall. Daniel Jones probably going to be able to take advantage of that. Moving on to number 3, Ryan Fitzpatrick. Ryan Fitzpatrick has been a guy that has been extremely good in the last couple of weeks, and is not really slowing down. And I think there's a potential that this coming week against the Indianapolis Colts could continue to roll and produce as well as he has thus far. All right, moving on to number 4, Derek Carr, playing against the Chargers. Chargers defense is good, but Derek Carr has been great in the last couple of weeks. Obviously, we'd like to see him throw for more touchdowns. We'd like to see him get more, listen, he's not a quarterback that's going to throw for 500 yards or have one of those flashy games. He's not. But getting it done with 300 passing yards and 2 touchdowns is something that honestly sometimes is taken for granted in fantasy football. So let's not go ahead and do that. Carr's another great option. Brian Hoyer, number 5, again, had a monster game. Goes against Miami this week. Seems like a pretty good option. Also moving on, Kyle Allen has been pretty good as of late. Obviously, has made some mistakes. He's prone to those mistakes. He is a younger, inexperienced quarterback. We understand that. But going forward, in this coming week's matchup against the Green Bay Packers, maybe the Green Bay Packers are on a tilt. They haven't seen a bye week at all this season. Maybe they're not feeling healthy. There's a chance that Kyle Allen could take advantage of that. Moving on, let's talk about defenses before we close out today's episode. Talking about defenses that could be available, maybe because of people dropping them or etc. I think these are pretty decent defensive plays. There are a lot of teams out this week. Again, we have to remember that. And I think there's a lot of defenses that are probably already owned in your league. But if Baltimore's not owned, they've been scoring defensively in the last couple of weeks, and they've looked far better than they have in weeks past. They get to take on Ryan Finley, a rookie quarterback. That's a free play. Baltimore is an amazing defense this week, certainly. Indianapolis Colts playing against Ryan Fitzpatrick. The guy is always capable of throwing interceptions, turning over the ball. there's an option that, there's an opportunity that the Colts can go ahead and take advantage of that. The Rams against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Mason Rudolph, again, another one of these inexperienced quarterbacks, will throw interceptions. And if the pass rush could, at least disrupt him a little bit more and more as the week comes in here, Jalen Ramsey's going to be all over Juju. It's going to be tough for this Steelers offense to move potentially outside of running the ball. So there could be options there for the Los Angeles Rams, especially considering they were perhaps dropped in your league this past week on the bye week. Kansas City Chiefs. With Mahomes gone, this defense has stepped up immensely. They have really stepped up, causing a lot of pressure, getting after the quarterback. Their defensive line's played pretty decently in the last couple of weeks. And I think there's a potential that this coming week, Kansas City could be a decent option. Now, I understand you may be thinking, okay, Andrew, they play against, well, goodness gracious, where am I looking? They play against the Tennessee Titans. Aren't the Tennessee Titans just going to run all over them with Derrick Henry? Derrick Henry's done it in the past in his career. Listen, this team has played a lot better in the last couple of weeks. Perhaps, maybe they throw a wrench into Ryan Tannehill's system and give him some trouble. The Pittsburgh Steelers, another option, because Jared Goff likes to throw picks and play terribly sometimes. And you get the Los Angeles Chargers. Maybe they're on a roll. Maybe they're back. If that's a potential, then perhaps they can go ahead and win on Thursday night in Oakland. Going to be a tough game, but there's always a possibility. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Don't forget, this coming week, there are a bunch of teams on bye week, so go ahead, attack the waiver wire if you are in need of help. If you are in need of just a kicker or a defense, do not waste the waiver wire priority and or your fab. Do not do that. It's not a good idea. Just wait. Unless you are getting a monster defense that is already past their bye, or a monster kicker, like perhaps you get like a Justin Tucker sitting there, or perhaps Greg Zuerlein is somehow sitting on the waivers. Go ahead and pick those guys up. But otherwise, thank you, everybody, for watching. Until next time, which will be tomorrow, talking about running backs with my running back starter sits. I appreciate you guys spending today with me, and hopefully you have already won your week. But if you have tonight's players, Zeke, Cooper, Dak, Gallup, Saquon, Evan Ingram, Golden Tate, Daniel Jones, pretty good players there. So it should be a fun game. And until tomorrow, guys, I'll see you guys. Peace.